Water, the element of life. And increasingly, a threat to humanity. Whether in Asia, Europe, or America, sea levels are rising on all the world's coasts. Even metropolises with millions of inhabitants are in danger of sinking into the sea.
So the rising sea levels are, of course, a particular threat for anybody living in a megacity, anybody living near a coast, and the megacities are especially vulnerable because they host a large number of people.
The climate is visibly slipping out of control. Do we even stand a chance?
The only way to deal with it right now is to find technical solutions that help us deal with the effects.
It's a race with an uncertain outcome. Chapter 1, Natural Disasters. What natural disasters await us as a result? Chapter 2, Coastal Protection. How can we protect our coastlines worldwide? And finally, megacities. What does all this mean for our cities? We'll find out on Facing Forces of Nature. First, rise to the challenge. Water. For billions of years, it has covered nearly the entire planet. At first, only one continent existed, Pangaea. But inside planet Earth, there's enormous pressure and temperatures of around 6,000 degrees Celsius. Volcanoes increasingly break open the Earth's crust and split the continent in two. Since then, the plates have been drifting apart and gradually formed the world as we now know it.
With the breakup of the supercontinent, we also increased the amount of coastal area and shelves. So compared to a supercontinental scenario, humanity today has a lot more coastal places, coastal areas to protect.
For thousands of years, rivers and seas have been important transport routes. They also provide food. In fact, water is considered the most important resource in the world.
The sea is a really important element of the Earth, not just kind of physically, but also for life as we know it. For many communities, it's a source of food via fishing, but it's also the way that we transport many of the goods around the world.
Oceans and climate are closely connected. It is normal that temperatures of our planet fluctuate. But for the past 150 years, another factor has come into play: industrialization, and with it, greenhouse gases, which act like an accelerant. In the 19th century, the sea level rises by just 0.6 millimeters per year. In the 20th century, it is rising more than twice as fast. Today, researchers expect sea levels to rise by up to 3.6 millimeters per year. Their forecasts say there will be more. On the one hand, due to global warming, more and more polar ice is melting, especially on Greenland and Antarctica, while filling up the oceans, so to speak. Second, water expands as it warms, causing the level to rise even further.
You can imagine a bathtub full of water, and you add water to it, and you heat it up. What will happen? Basically, the bathtub will overflow. And in the case of the oceans, it means that the water will basically spill onto the land masses.
All this is only the beginning of a dangerous development.
If all of the ice on Earth were lost, so that's the ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica, and also glaciers in the Himalayas and the Andes and so on, then sea levels would rise at least 65 meters.
With the resources of the 21st century, what possibilities do we have to avert what may be the greatest catastrophe in human history? All over the world, measuring stations now monitor any change in the sea level around the clock, in the coastal regions themselves, and from space. Satellites send radar signals in the direction of Earth and pick up their reflection. This way, they even measure changes in sea level in the millimeter range.
We use satellites to measure the ocean level globally because we know that the rise of ocean levels is non-uniform. It happens quicker in some areas than in others. So in order to be able to predict how it will impact civilizations or land areas, we need to monitor everywhere.
Only satellites make it possible to predict which region of our Earth will be hit next. But one thing is clear. In the end, it will affect everyone. While natural disasters like volcanic eruptions and earthquakes have been constant for centuries, climate disasters, such as increasingly extreme storm surges, are on the rise.
Storm surges generally become higher, but also we experience more frequent storms, and that means that the storm surges become themselves more frequent. So we get both stronger storm surges and more frequent storm surges.
Like in Hamburg, Germany, in November 1962. In the middle of the night, water breaks through the city's dikes.
No one could have predicted that the city would wake up to the biggest catastrophe that a big German city suffered since the last war.
The result, more than 300 dead. Thousands are left homeless. More than 50 years later, in 2013, an even worse catastrophe occurs in Southeast Asia. A typhoon barrels towards the coast. Storm surges and heavy rain cause massive damage.
It was one of the strongest tropical cyclones we have in recorded weather history.
Tens of thousands die. Millions become homeless. Various aid organizations spend days providing support to the population, whose lives were completely ruined in a very short time. One of the latest disasters that can be attributed to global warming occurs in the U.S. Hurricane Ian. In September 2022, Ian sweeps across the country's eastern seaboard. The storm surges that follow are devastating. Within hours, Fort Myers, Florida, a vacation paradise, is razed to the ground. The storm surges claim the lives of more than 80 people.
Hurricanes are storms initiated on the ocean, and then they move towards the land. As they move towards the land, they push water masses onto the land. So if they hit any communities living close to the coast, these communities will be flooded, and this will cause enormous damage.
The combination of global warming, rising sea levels, and hurricanes threatens us on many fronts simultaneously.
So if we combine tropical storms or cyclones with an elevated sea level, we can create stronger storm surges that are not flooding larger areas on land, destroying more in their way.
The sea level rises only a few millimeters per year, but the total mass of water is colossal and corresponds to over 1 trillion cubic meters. If you load this amount of water into tankers with a capacity of 50,000 liters and line them up, the column would go around the outermost ring of Saturn about 32 times. Climate catastrophes such as storm surges are not only becoming more extreme, they are also occurring more frequently.
Scientists have calculated that an event like Hurricane Ian has been made about 3 times more likely by climate change. So what would have taken place about once every 100 years is now taking place about once every 30 years or so. And we also live with the consequences of that. So even if we stabilize temperatures at what they are today, we have caused that temperature rise, and storms and extreme weather events all around the world are going to be more likely than they would be.
Our best chance for anticipating these forces of nature is data, whether from measuring stations on the ground or from space. Data is regularly gathered in real time to capture any climatic changes.
So these climate simulations, they're very advanced computer code programs that are run by supercomputers, and they are able to simulate the climate into the future. And they are able to tell us how the climate will look like if we continue emitting CO2 as we do today, or what will happen to the climate if we emit more CO2, or if we stop emitting CO2 right now. And then knowing what will happen in the future, how the climate will be affected, how different parts of the world will be hit by the changing climate, we can change our behavior.
It's important to note that climate projections are not weather forecasts. They merely reflect various if-then scenarios. This is the only way scientists will ever be able to properly assess risks and prepare for the dangers ahead. But a computer simulation of natural events and the calculation of natural disasters require enormous computing power.
One really cool example is in Japan, where they have a computer called the Earth Simulator.
Currently, the Japanese Earth Simulator program is the most effective tool we have to predict how the rising ocean levels will impact communities across the globe.
Such computers are among the most powerful in the world.
We have models of oceans, models of ice sheets, models of land use, for example. But of course, all of these individual elements interact with each other. So, for example, when ice melts, it goes into the ocean, and that changes what the ocean is doing. So if we really want to create a detailed picture of what's going to happen in the future and what sea level rise, for example, is going to be, then we need to stick all of these individual models together in what's called an Earth system model. So these take in lots of different aspects, like I mentioned, and create a sort of holistic picture of the Earth and provide a more detailed prediction of what's going to happen in the future.
Researchers can now permanently calculate the dangers of natural disasters for various regions of the planet. But how can we defy these dangers? What possibilities do we have in the here and now to protect our coastlines? One thing is clear. The results of the climate models are alarming.
Currently, 40% of the world's population live within 100 kilometers from the coast, meaning that 3 billion people are at threat from sea level rise.
Due to global warming, experts expect sea levels to rise by 30 to 140 centimeters by the year 2100. This calculation depends on if and how people reduce greenhouse gases.
Even with a small amount of sea level rise, waves are able to break much later and carry more force. And so even with a relatively small amount of sea level rise, we can get more damage to coastal areas.
One of the places in the world that is highly threatened by rising sea levels are the coastal regions of the North Sea. As a result, an extraordinary project is being created, so-called climate dikes.
So with the climate dikes, scientists have achieved to construct a really effective counteractive device to deal with the effects of sea level rise.
These basically represent a unique and innovative way of protecting land from the rising sea levels.
A key difference between classic dikes and climate dikes is their depth. Climate dikes extend far and deep into the sea.
When these dikes were built, they were built for the conditions of the time. They weren't built to withstand the sea level rises that we might see by the end of the century, say. And that means that they're just not really designed for what's coming. They're not designed to deal with the storm surges that we might see in the future.
Rising sea levels are factored into the design of these climate dikes. Starting from the crown, the highest point on the dike, they protrude far, sloping into the water. When a rising wave rolls towards a dike, its strength diminishes due to the uphill rolling. The result? The wave is decelerated before it even reaches the top of the dike.
So people living by the coast have always known that the effect of a very gently rising sea floor is good to break the waves. But up until recently, it was technically not possible to achieve the same effect by construction.
Today, engineers have the knowledge and technical means to build dikes that, based on the latest calculations, will withstand storm surges even in 100 years from now. But as convincing as the new technology sounds, the realization of climate dikes is costly, and the costs soar into the millions. Depending on weather conditions, construction work can drag on for years.
So the new dikes are built by taking the old dike as a base and then just basically building new sand dikes on top. And the idea is that these dikes will be big enough to withstand the storm surges that we might see in the future.
After completion, integrated sensors log ground movements. The final layer on the dike is a dense and short lawn. This is to prevent sand and soil from being washed away by the sea. Once a dike is completed, It can reach up to 130 meters wide and 9 meters high. If the sea level rises more than calculated, it would even be possible to add a levee extension, should a crest be exceptionally wide.
So the tricky thing is that we are building infrastructure that keeps our current cities that are close by the sea safe from the sea level rise of today and the sea level rise of tomorrow and maybe for the next decades. And these infrastructures will also protect our cities from the big floods of the decade or the century. But we're also encouraging people to settle in the area. So we're increasing urbanization, we're increasing the amount of population that lives close to the sea. So we are then have to count with a lot of losses in case those climate dikes break or the infrastructure doesn't hold against the flood of the millennium. So by settling in areas that are not naturally fit to withstand the forces of nature, we have to count with bigger losses in the future.
The islands off the coast also protect against the consequences of sea level rise.
The Halligen Islands are a small group of islands off the north coast of Germany. They're all fairly small. The largest is about 9.6 square kilometers. And they basically provide a natural wave break, if you like. They stop some of the biggest waves from reaching the north coast of Germany and therefore reduce the amount of damage they can do.
Islands off the coasts usually break the waves and help calm the sea. But there is also a catch.
The Halligen Islands, they are naturally threatened because they are already at or even below the current sea level. So they are massively threatened by sea level rise.
The Halligen Islands form a barrier to the rising ocean levels, and they are very effective. But ultimately, if the sea level rises enough, they themselves will also be submerged.
The solution to protect against floods is artificially raised mounds of earth, called terps, that raise the ground beneath the buildings by 5 meters.
If you cannot prevent a sea level rise from happening, you basically have to adapt to it. And this is what they did on Halligen Islands by essentially building the houses on higher mounds that protect them from the seawater.
When the tide comes in, everything below the terps is flooded.
This shape of island is quite unique in the world. The archipelago itself is not protected from rising sea levels and storm surges, but rather adapted to deal with them.
All over the world, islander residents are trying to save their homes from the floods. Like in Hawaii, for example.
So in Hawaii, they're taking a bit of a different approach, and they're basically fortifying the beaches. So they take sand from inland and essentially add it to the beaches, and that, as it sounds, just makes the beaches more resilient.
To strengthen a beach just over 2 kilometers long, 57,341 cubic meters of sand are needed. It's an amount that would be sufficient to build a stretch of highway nearly 2 kilometers long. If this volume of sand is loaded onto dump trucks and they lined up, you'd get a 37-kilometer-long convoy of dump trucks. It's an attempt by residents to salvage a portion of their blissful beaches from rising sea levels. But Hawaii is not the only place struggling with coastal erosion or receding sandy beaches due to swelling sea levels.
So, due to the rise of sea level, more of the naturally occurring sand that is protecting the coasts of islands is washed away. And then the foundation of the islands are exposed to waves and storms, which increases coastal erosion again. So it's a vicious cycle. Erosion just gets stronger and stronger, threatening coastal habitats and living spaces.
It's a vicious cycle, dramatically exacerbated by elevated sea levels and storm surges. According to computer simulations, coastal regions around the globe could lose up to 50% of their sandy beaches. Eastern North America, Southern and Western Asia, Australia, but also Central Europe are all affected.
We lose beaches and therefore natural habitats due to the rising sea levels and due to increased erosion of the land by the sea.
Wherever people settle, the coastal structure changes. Dams also have an impact. They prevent rivers from transporting sediments. Sediments are important because they strengthen the coasts and help stop erosion. Another problem is massive sand excavation.
Especially in the construction industry, sand is needed. To construct 1 kilometer of motorway, you need 30,000 tons of sand and gravel. But there's no unlimited sand resource.
When sand is added in one place, it goes missing somewhere else. The best option for sand fill is extracting it from the deep sea. First, deep water sand is pumped from the seabed and transported to the coast. Sandy beaches are then reinforced by large dredging ships, spraying millions of cubic meters of sand onto them. This replaces what storms have swept away. On some coastlines, it also makes sense to fortify the natural coastal safeguards, like coral reefs, for example. Coral reefs act as natural breakwaters, weakening their power. As a result, coastal areas suffer less damage from storm surges. Coastal erosion also occurs less frequently, but due in part to ocean warming, more and more reefs are suffering from coral bleaching.
Corals are really under threat from coral bleaching. So as we emit more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, the ocean has to uptake more carbon dioxide, and it tends therefore to get more acidic, and that leads to the bleaching. So as we pump more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we get more coral bleaching and more loss of coral.
As sea levels continue to rise, coral bleaching prevents corals from growing.
Coral bleaching is a tragedy on many levels. On the one hand, it reduces the ability of the coral reefs to protect the land, and this in turn will impact humans living on the land and of course animals. But on the other hand, bleaching of the corals means that the ocean world loses one of its key habitats. It is the birthplace of many sea creatures, and therefore the impact is much more wide-ranging for the ocean as well.
To counter coral bleaching, scientists around the world are creating artificial coral reefs. This is designed to preserve the reefs despite bleaching. But for some coastal populations, their only option is to leave their native coastal regions. Like the Carteret Islands in the Pacific, for example. Since the highest point of these islands is only 1.5 meters above sea level, it is only a matter of time before the islands are completely underwater. An evacuation already began in November 2005.
The evacuation of the Carteret Islands is not a technical solution, but maybe an example of humanity's oldest defense mechanism, and that's simply leaving the at-risk area.
A very unusual method of protecting its homeland from sinking into the rising sea is being taken by the government of the island nation of Tuvalu in Oceania. During a flood, up to 40% of the capital district stands underwater. To avert disaster, despite the dramatic situation, the president of Tuvalu plans to make his state the world's first digital nation.
One very sad consequence of the rising sea levels is that some islands will simply disappear. There's nothing that we can do to stop that from happening. So for the case of Tuvalu Islands, for example, they still have their land and can still live on it, but they know it's going to disappear. So what they want to do to preserve the heritage and the culture is to basically recreate the land which is still there digitally, and then once it has been flooded, to enable future generations to still experience the island as it once was.
Drastic measures are especially essential when it comes to cities that are directly threatened by the sea.
When planners are deciding which measures should be put in place, there are a huge number of questions that need to be asked. Things like the economic value of the land, what the risk is, whether you need to plant some mangroves or you need a large flood wall. It's quite different response required in those two cases. There's also questions about inhabitants, the value of the local land, and so on.
All this affects not only coasts and islands, but also mega cities situated by the sea. The habitat for millions of people.
As the sea level rises, more and more people in these cities are at risk of losing homes and livelihoods because of sea level rise.
While the sea is inexorably taking over the land area along coastlines, at the same time, the population density in the megacities is steadily increasing. Rising sea levels, with their accompanying storm surges, present disastrous consequences for cities. Not least because concrete and asphalt continue to replace green spaces, which prevents water from draining away. How can these mega metropolises protect themselves from flooding and storm surges? This is quite apparent. For example, in Alexandria, Egypt, a city that is literally surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea.
The unique thing about Alexandria is that it's surrounded by water on three sides. So sea level rise is threatening the city from three sides, not just one.
5 million inhabitants, bridges, Beaches and historic buildings must be protected from water surges. So Alexandria builds protective walls along the coast. The latest project, tetrapods, heavy 4-foot building blocks that interlock, planted along the coast for added protection. Stacked in several rows, the building blocks serve as breakwaters.
So the idea of tetrapods is you place them out and they are forming a barrier against the force of the waves. Each of these tetrapods weighs 6 tons, so they cannot be moved by storm waves.
A single concrete block weighs 6 tons, which corresponds to about 3 Tesla Model 3s. If you convert the weight of 10,000 tetrapods and place the cars on the Golden Gate Bridge, the weight corresponds to 54 rows stacked on top of each other.
Alexandria has kind of been hit by every natural disaster you can imagine. So flooding, earthquakes, tsunamis, basically you name it, Alexandria has suffered from it.
Sooner or later, the population in the low-level areas of Alexandria will have to retreat. There's no other way.
Large parts of the 60-kilometer-long shore have now already been taken by the sea.
So what looks like a modest sea level rise of only 50 centimeters will basically rob Alexandria of 30% of its surface area and lead to the displacement of 1.5 million people.
It remains to be seen whether these protective measures will save the city and its people from water surges. While Alexandria relies on traditional methods in flood control, the coastal city of New York has developed a gigantic structure to protect the population of Manhattan from rising sea levels. A devastating event in the year 2012 fired the starting shot. Hurricane Sandy hits New York with full force and sweeps across the city.
Hurricane Sandy was really the event that brought home the message to people living in a mega city like New York that the rising sea levels were an acute problem. The threats from rising sea levels are often a theoretical concept which nobody wants to invest money into. However, the occurrence of Sandy in New York basically brought home the message also to the planners of the city. So they have launched the ESCR project, which helps protect Manhattan and the rest of New York from flooding.
ESCR, the East Side Coastal Resiliency Project, is one of the largest and most technically complex infrastructure projects in New York's history. The cost is $1.4 billion US. Over a span of nearly 2.5 miles, a combination of an elevated park, flood walls, and sluice gates will in the future strengthen Manhattan's waterfront.
New York has this really cool idea that instead of building a single flood defense system, like a big wall, for example, they're going to integrate their flood defense mechanism into existing structures. And that has the benefit that it also improves kind of access to the waterfront, which is a really nice area of the city. You don't have a big wall there preventing access.
The project is a huge investment that will allow generations of New Yorkers to live normal daily lives, even as sea levels rise. The construction work is massive. East River Park will be raised by about 2 up to 3 meters and rebuilt.
In comparison to other protective measures, the way that New York has chosen is not hiding away the changing sea level from people. Instead, they are experiencing the sea, they're experiencing living with the sea, and that way people in New York are developing a consciousness for the changing forces of nature.
The elevated park primarily protects the high rises behind it.
So the idea with the park is that if sea level rise is slightly higher than expected, or what scientists expect right now, then there's a bit of leeway and this can be raised by another 60 or so centimeters.
Flood walls and locks are also important for this. Integrated into the landscape, they enable largely invisible flood protection.
So the floodgates are open whenever the weather is safe, and they're only closed when there are storms and floods.
But this type of flood protection creates another problem. No more water gets in, but no water goes out either. Like precipitation or rainwater. But the city of New York has come up with a solution for that too. A state-of-the-art canal system.
Yeah, so if you start building big flood walls to keep water out, then of course you can also keep water in. And cities are made of concrete and asphalt and these materials that don't really absorb water. So if there's heavy rain, there's a huge amount of water just sitting on the surface and it doesn't really have anywhere to go. And that can essentially lead to flooding in itself. And that's because we tried to build these barriers to keep seawater out, but actually now we're keeping seawater in and flooding the city that way.
To keep excess water from collecting inside the locks, New York City is installing new sewage lines. But a dangerous situation could surface, not only when a rising sea interacts with extreme weather conditions.
A further threat to megacities is the fact that humans are pumping water out of the ground, and therefore the groundwater levels are lowering. This, in turn, threatens the whole structural integrity of cities.
Years of illegally pumping groundwater intensifies the problem of an elevated sea level. This problem is particularly menacing in the capital of Indonesia, Jakarta, for example. With a population of 10 million, Jakarta holds a sad record.
So in Jakarta, for example, we have the combined effect of sea level rise at the same time as the ground is subsiding. Actually, Jakarta is the fastest sinking megacity in the world.
The only foreseeable solution, resettlement. A new capital is being built far away from the coastline. For the time being, it's only for the government.
Because of this accelerated effect of both sea level rise and subsidence due to groundwater pumping, Jakarta is an important reminder of what's in store for other megacities around the world when it comes to the rise of sea level.
When it comes to contending with rising sea levels, nearly every city has come up with its own approach. Take London, for example, and its imposing Thames Barrier. The devastating North Sea tidal surge on Britain's east coast in 1953 cost 307 people their lives and left thousands homeless. Shortly thereafter, work begins on the huge Thames Barrier. With a total length of 520 meters and 10 swinging gates, London inaugurates the barrier in 1984. The gates are lowered to the bottom of the Thames to allow ships to pass.
The Thames Barrier is quite revolutionary in that it allows us to react to any surges in sea level within about 15 minutes to protect the City of London. Normally, this would take several hours.
Even though it is not located directly on the coast, the predicted rise in sea levels could soon, eventually, threaten London.
The Thames Barrier keeps London safe from flooding, and how long it's able to do that depends on what the sea level rise will be.
Since the mid-20th century, lowland countries have also been visibly protecting themselves against potential flood disasters. In the greater Rotterdam area, a gigantic barrier protects the foreland at the Nueva Waterweg estuary, the Maesland Barrier.
When a storm flood threatens, the docks are flooded and the gates open and swing towards the estuary.
These gates will open and allow water into a kind of designated area. This basically prevents flooding in the docks.
Even though there are many encouraging solutions to adapt our present and future lives to rising sea levels, the climate is becoming increasingly unpredictable. It is primarily up to us to change this behavior. Now, more than ever, our future and the future of tomorrow's generations lies in our own hands.